Hey everyone, this is Kyle Hamrick from School of Motion, and welcome to another video in the Learn from the Pros series on Adobe After Effects. You were introduced to the Timeline panel earlier in the series. As you've seen, this is where a lot of your actual work will be happening in After Effects, so in these next few videos, we'll be taking a closer look at some of the features available there. This video will focus on how to best navigate and organize your timeline, so you can work efficiently and stay tidy as your projects start to become more complex. First, let's cover a few organizational tips. Naming your layers is a great way to help keep things clear. You can rename layers by right-clicking and then choosing Rename from this big pop-up menu, or just by pressing the Enter key. Type in a new name, then press Enter again to close that out. I also find it helpful to color code my layers to easily keep track of elements or to visually group things together. By clicking on this color chip right here, you have the opportunity to choose a different color for the layer, which will be represented in the color chip itself, on the layer in the timeline, and also in the layer controls visible up here in your viewer. That color chip pop-up also gives you the option to select all the layers of the same color, so this can be a clever way of grouping layers you may want to select all at once. Speaking of selecting layers, if you'd like to manually select more than one at a time, you can choose a large group of them by clicking, holding Shift, and then clicking another layer. To individually select or deselect multiple layers, click on one, hold Control or Command, then click on more layers until your selection is complete. In addition to naming and color coding, I also find markers to be a very helpful way to make notes, mark an important point in your animation, and even add an additional layer of color coding. If you import a video or audio file that already has markers added within another Adobe program, those will be displayed as soon as that file is added to your timeline. You can create a marker on selected layers by pressing the asterisk key, and this actually also works while previewing. Double-clicking a marker will open up this dialog box, where you can add comments, give the marker a color, and even add a duration. To set a duration on a single frame marker without opening the dialog box, you can hold Alt or Option and then drag to the right. You'll now have the ability to freely drag both ends of the marker, to reposition the starting frame, or to change the duration. Pressing the asterisk key without any layers selected will instead create a composition marker. On the far right side of your timeline, you can drag numbered markers out from this icon over here, or you can also place these on the current frame by pressing Shift and then the desired key from your top number line. Once these numbered markers are placed, you can quickly jump to any of them by pressing that corresponding number on the top number line of your keyboard. You'll likely be zooming in and out a lot as you work on your animation. You have this little slider right down here at the bottom of your timeline panel. You can drag this to the right towards the big mountains to zoom in, or you can drag it to the left towards the little mountains to zoom out. You can also use the plus and minus keys up at the top of your keyboard to zoom in or out on the timeline. Once you get more than a couple layers in here, it can start getting kind of full, and there might be times you'd like to make this bigger without having to mess with your workspace. You can quickly maximize your timeline panel, or any panel here in After Effects, by pressing the accent or tilde key. To go back to our previous view, we'll just press that key again. Once you start using more layers, effects, and properties, it can be a lot to keep track of. And while you can certainly twirl things open to find them, it might be faster to just search for those things. If you haven't already noticed it, I'll point out this search bar right here in your timeline panel, which you can also access by pressing Control or Command F. If I search for a property, in this case I'll use stroke, you'll see it reveals any properties on the currently selected layer or layers that contain that word. An important strategy here in After Effects is that you may not always want to preview or export your entire timeline. Near the top of the panel is this gray bar with blue ends. This is called your work area, and that's what determines what you'll be previewing and or exporting. You can drag these ends around to set that manually. See how the cursor changes? Or if you'd like to be more precise, you can hit B to set the beginning of your work area to the current frame, or you can hit N to set the end of your work area to the current frame. Moving between different frames to adjust values is another task you'll be doing very frequently, so let's see if we can save you some time there as well. This blue thing right here is known as your current time indicator, or CTI, or you could also call it the playhead if you're more familiar with that term from video editing. While you can absolutely just drag it around to view different frames, I usually prefer the precision and convenience of using keyboard shortcuts. You might already be aware of using page up and page down to move backwards or forwards frame by frame. If you prefer, you could also use Control or Command and the left and right arrow keys to do this. If you hold the Shift key along with either of these, you'll jump 10 frames at a time instead. To go to the very first frame of your composition, press the Home key. To go to the very last frame of your composition, press the End key. You can jump to a specific timecode or frame by clicking on it here in your timeline, or here in your composition viewer, or you can also access that by pressing Alt or Option, Shift, J. I'll just type this in as 5 seconds and 0 frames. Quickly jumping between existing keyframes is also very handy, because you may often find yourself hopping back and forth adjusting these values as you fine-tune your animation. As before, you can drag the CTI around, and holding Shift will make it snap to any existing keyframes, markers, in and out points, etc. But you can also hit J to jump to the previous keyframe, or K to jump to the next keyframe. J and K are also aware of layer markers, and these will also stop at the boundaries of the work area that we just set up. If you'd like to quickly jump to the in or out point of a selected layer, you can press I for the in point, or O for the out point. Hopping around to these specific places is definitely helpful, but there are plenty of times where we want to actually move or trim the layers instead of moving our CTI. Once again, you can drag these, of course, but precision is good and saving yourself clicks is good. I mentioned earlier that you can use page up and page down to move your CTI frame by frame. If you hold Alt or Option while you press those, you will actually nudge your currently selected layer or layers by a single frame instead. As before, if you also hold down the Shift key, it will nudge those by 10 frames at a time. If you'd like to move the in point of the selected layer or layers to your current frame, the Open Bracket key will do that. If I do this with a single layer, it just moves it there. If I do this with multiple layers, which currently have different start times, it will actually align all of them to begin at that frame. For the same behavior with the layer's out points, I can use the Close Bracket key. That will move the selected layer or layers so the out point is now at our current frame. Perhaps instead we'd like to reset our layers to all begin at the first frame of our composition. We can press Alt or Option plus the Home key to move the currently selected layer or layers so that the in point is now at that first frame. Alt or Option plus End will move the layers so that the last frame of those layers will be aligned to the last frame of the composition. If we would rather trim these layers instead of moving them, once again we have the option to drag using our mouse. Notice if I hover right over the end of this layer, I get a little double-sided arrow, and I can click and drag to start trimming this. I'm doing this on a video layer specifically because that has a duration. You can see this kind of grayed out area where the layer still exists, but we've trimmed it so it won't be visible until it reaches this frame. To do this using the keyboard, you can press Alt or Option and then the open bracket, and it will trim your currently selected layer or layers so that the new in point is on your current frame. To instead trim the out point, press Alt or Option and then the close bracket. You can, of course, select and move layers using your mouse, or to quickly cycle which layer you have selected, press Ctrl or Command and the up and down arrow keys. If you would instead like to move these layers in the layer stack, you can press Ctrl or Command plus Alt or Option and the up and down arrow keys to move these up and down in the layer order. To move a selected layer to the very top of the layer stack, Ctrl or Command, Shift, close bracket. To move a selected layer to the very bottom of the layer stack, Ctrl or Command, Shift, open bracket. Hopefully these tips will get you more comfortable and more efficient when working in the After Effects timeline. Be sure to check out all the other videos in this Learn from the Pros series on Adobe After Effects. For Adobe Creative Cloud, I'm Kyle Hamrick from School of Motion. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.